Early morning, 19th of November 1942. In the vast expanse of the plains to the west of Stalingrad, World War II is about to take a turn for the worse. More than 1 million Red Army soldiers are waiting for the command to cast a noose of steel round the German 6th Army. Stalin has sent his best man to lead this operation, Marshal Grigory Zhukov.
Whenever Zhukov appeared, there was bound to be a big battle. That's what the men all used to say back then. We were all aware of that. So when he showed up in our midst, we knew things would soon start. And we were right. It didn't take very long before we got orders to attack.
Marshal Grigory Zhukov has learned from his army's mistakes. After defending Russia for more than a year, the Red Army is now ready to go on the offensive. Since August, Hitler's 6th Army has been waiting at Stalingrad on the Volga. This is the longest river in Europe. It forms the boundary with Asia. More than 2,700 kilometers from Berlin, the German soldiers fear the winter and the wide open spaces, but underestimate the enemy.
Until then, the 6th Army had been used to winning every battle. So we never thought it possible that the enemy would carry out a pincer movement and surround us like that. At first, we simply couldn't believe that we'd come to the end of the line. But we had.
For many, this is a completely new experience. Instead of a quick victory, there is only the odd isolated skirmish. In November 1942, there is not much troop movement on the Volga battlefront. The ice and the freezing weather keep the soldiers busy. Most of them are still unaware of what lies ahead. But on the Russian side of the Volga, the Red Army is itching for a fight.
At first, we were worried that the big offensive attack would be postponed because of bad weather. There was thick fog. But when the moment came, we all opened fire. The Katyushas, our multiple rocket launchers, fired the first shots, and then we immediately joined in with our weapons. The preparation for battle lasted only 80 minutes. That's all the time we were given to get ready before we moved out.
The attack is launched shortly after 5:30 German time. A barrage of 3,500 guns makes the earth tremble 50 kilometers away. Zhukov's decisive battle has been well planned.
I'm telling you, that cannonade was incredible. Never before or after in my entire life have I heard anything like that. Hundreds and hundreds of heavy artillery pieces and Katyusha multiple rocket launchers were creating an inferno. We could see it because they weren't firing at us. The Russians were concentrating on the Romanian divisions immediately next to us on our flank. That was our weakest point, the Romanians.
This is all that remains of the Romanian army after the battle. Their government has sent them to take part in Hitler's plundering raid, and these Romanian soldiers have paid the highest price. But even the Soviet victors have suffered heavy losses.
The Red Army's infantrymen advanced in open formation, and their commander rode behind them on horseback. He looked just like a sheepdog driving a flock of sheep in front of him, the way he rode that horse.
The German artillery creates a bloodbath.
The commander went wild. He drew his pistol and drove the next division to the front. Since our artillery battery's first salvo had already hit home, it was no problem. I don't think many shots were fired, maybe as few as 10 rounds. And after that, they were all dead.
Zhuikov surprises the Germans with an old strategy. His tanks strike at the enemy's vulnerable rear. The Russians overrun the expanse between the Volga and the Donau. The relative strengths of the forces have changed significantly.
By the 19th of November, our army had a total of only 80 tanks in good running order. A few were being repaired and were soon ready to join in the battle. Nevertheless, at any moment in time, we had a maximum of only 100 tanks that were in operation. But the Russians had lined up 1,200 brand new T-34s against us.
The Russian Empire has unparalleled resources. In the east, behind the Ural Mountains, hundreds of new armaments factories are built, seemingly out of thin air. In just 3 days, the pincer movement succeeds as two Soviet wedge formations meet at Kalach on the Donau. Roughly 300,000 German and Romanian soldiers are immobilized at Stalingrad, trapped in a noose of steel. This is a reenactment of the moment when the two Soviet armies met, performed and filmed for propaganda purposes. The moment is full of military pathos. From the start, German soldiers caught in the unrelenting Russian noose realize they are heading for disaster. One man writes to his wife,
"My darling Magdalena, I'm writing this letter in an attempt, a final attempt to make contact with the outside world. The past couple of days were horrifying."
Many know what is in store for them.
We were scared that they would do to us exactly what we had done to hundreds and thousands of Russians up to that time during the campaign. And I'm not exaggerating the numbers. That really happened. That really was the case. We were scared of being trapped ourselves and scared of avenging Russian soldiers. At that time in the war, both sides had become completely ruthless. We knew what was going to happen to us, all right. There would be no quarter.
22nd of November 1942, while Hitler relaxes at Berchtesgaden, his fortified retreat in the Alps, his fate is being decided in the east. When he receives the bad news from the Volga, the Führer orders General Friedrich Paulus, commander of the 6th Army, to maintain his position at Stalingrad no matter what. Even the renowned Field Marshal Manstein, who was immediately ordered to the front, does not yet realize the seriousness of the situation. But other army commanders despair and advise Hitler to order Paulus to break out of the Stalingrad pocket. They nearly succeed.
One memorable evening, Hitler, Zeitzler, and Heusinger talked for hours on end. I don't know till what time, probably 2 a.m. Zeitzler urged the Führer to immediately withdraw the 6th Army. But the next morning, Göring said that the Air Force could sustain our men in Russia with supplies of at least 500 tons, and Hitler promptly decided to stick to his guns. The Germans would stay at Stalingrad.
Göring has made a crucial mistake. His Air Force mobilizes all its men, but they are unable to provide the huge amount of supplies needed at Stalingrad. The men caught in the Kessel are living on empty promises.
All kinds of rumors were going about among the soldiers at Stalingrad. But the men were placated with the comforting but irresponsible slogan, "Stick it out, the Führer will get us out."
The Luftwaffe gets food, fuel, and ammunition through to Stalingrad. but many planes are shot down. The planes also bring letters from home.
Letters from home were a link to relatives. The last and incredibly important link that gave the men, some were still mere boys, who fought far away from their loved ones, hope, and motivated them to continue fighting.
The letters written by the men caught in the Russian trap are some of the most moving documents. They give an insight into the tragedy. One officer tries to reassure his wife.
The situation is turning in our favor, but of course, all good things take time. What are our darling children up to? I can still see them standing on the stairs, waving goodbye to me. At the moment, the Russian commander seems to be making a real effort to break us down.
But the addressee suspects that the truth is much worse.
You don't write a letter full of despair to a pregnant woman. He just knew somehow that the baby would be born on his birthday, and that was what happened.
The young mother is expecting her fourth child. Her husband comes home on leave in the autumn of 1942, but by the beginning of December, he is back in Stalingrad.
When my husband left, we knew the situation was desperate. It was difficult to say goodbye because neither of us knew what the future had in store.
In wartime, this is the fate of millions. Every goodbye is a tragedy, and there is no way to escape it.
We were powerless. We couldn't say, I don't like this, this isn't for me. Those are things that are inconceivable to today's young people. We simply had to accept our fate.
Her husband has no choice. He has to return to the Kessel. On the Russian side, there is a tremendous will to win the war, fired on by the belief that socialism is superior. Ultimately, the Russian generals are all loyal to the party line.
Heroism like this is only possible in a country like ours, our Russia. Because the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is a nation where people were shaped by men such as Lenin and Stalin, a country where the nation was forged into a unified, monolithic, and invincible collective. We never doubted our country, Mother Russia, not for one single second. Russia is a huge country, and so many enemies have tried to defeat us in the past. But no one has ever succeeded. So we never ever had a shadow of a doubt, not in the slightest.
The success of the first days leaves the Red Army soldiers in high spirits, and in many cases drunk as well. In several places they come across military equipment and food depots and help themselves to German supplies.
Berezovsky, which lies between Stalingrad and Kalach. We took a German corps by surprise and confiscated their whole supply of food. Yes, of course, we drank a lot. I don't have to hide that. Drinking vodka is a Russian tradition, isn't it? The enemy had really good food. We were used to eating only mash, but there we found some real delicacies. And we even drank French wines and cognac.
Stalin is adamant that the Sixth Army has to be annihilated completely before the Germans get a chance to launch a counteroffensive. But Zhuikov knows that by now the German army is far too weak for that. He is planning something even bigger, to cut off the entire German army in the south.
I can still remember how happy I was, and all my friends and comrades, when we heard that our two fronts had joined up with each other and managed to surround the whole German Sixth Army. We all knew that they would never be able to get out of Stalingrad, no matter how much help they had from their comrades back in Germany.
For the first German captives, the war has come to an end, but that is hardly any reason to heave a sigh of relief.
Did I feel any sympathy for the German soldiers? Of course not. How could I feel sorry for them? Once, when I was on duty, wearing my weapon, I saw some German prisoners who were carrying an injured man. I told them, "You fools, you had no business coming here to Russia." The Germans were filthy, wrapped in rags. How could I feel sorry for them? Who invited them to our country?
Hatred breeds more hatred. But not only the Germans notice this as the days go by. The hardships of war also have an effect on the ordinary Red Army soldiers.
Life had no value whatsoever at the front. Today you're lying next to your friend, and tomorrow you have to bury him. After one particularly fierce attack, only 10 of our 120 men remained.
On both sides, the combatants' determination is beginning to wane. To keep up the Soviet Army's fighting power, officers enforce iron discipline and take brutal measures.
Once, we urgently needed a messenger to go to the front line. Our captain walked into our shelter and told one soldier, "You there, get dressed and go outside." The man had just returned from guard duty and had taken off his coat. "No, I'm not going," he said. "What was that?" the captain barked. I said, "No, I'm not going anywhere now." "What did you say?" "Come outside with me." The two men went outside and the captain drew his pistol. A German parabellum and said, "Are you going now?" "No, I'm not," I said. "Are you going?" "No, I'm not." Captain fired a shot above his head. But still the soldier said, "I'm not going." He was quite an old man and he was exhausted and had no strength left. The soldier said, "I can't go anywhere now. I've just come off guard duty. I'm too tired. I've had it." So the captain shot him there and then for refusing to obey an order. And he came back into our shelter and said, "Go outside, dig a hole in the ground and bury him." And that's what we had to do.
Both sides suffer terribly. A German artillery officer writes home,
"At night we freeze. How much longer do we still have to sleep in the open? Our bodies won't last much longer. Not to mention the dirt and the lice."
Gradually, the people at home realize what the men stationed at the Volga have to endure.
He wrote, "Think of me all the time, just as I'm thinking of you." That gave him strength. He told me that in a letter. "Think of me. It gives me the strength to bear all this."
Gerhard Kollek is a tank driver at Stalingrad, doomed to die. He does not mince his words and is very open with his wife.
He wanted to keep the last bullet for himself. He refused to be taken prisoner. I used to say to him, "And what about us? What will become of us here under Hitler?"
Officially, Hitler never utters a word about the drama at Stalingrad. The weekly newsreels lead everyone to believe that things are fine, and the reports from the armed forces don't say anything about the battle or Chuikov's pincer movement, which will eventually turn the tide of war back on Germany. Letters from Stalingrad are censored or withheld when necessary, But nonetheless, rumors are rife in the fatherland. The fate of 300,000 men cannot be hushed up. Inside the Stalingrad pocket, which the Germans called the Kessel, the cauldron, supply shortages are claiming more victims than the battle. The thermometer drops to minus 20 degrees. Extreme cold and hunger combine to weaken the soldiers.
In other words, it was sheer misery for the ground troops in the Stalingrad Kessel. As part of my duties, I had to go into the shelters and decide which men were still capable of fighting. It made my stomach turn to see that filth, that much agony. I turned around, went outside again and said, "I'm sorry, I can't execute my order." The major asked me why I couldn't do it, and I told him to go in there and see for himself. He came back out and vomited after what he'd witnessed inside that shelter.
The wounded and sick have little chance of survival, and on top of that, there's the epidemic of typhus.
I had the bad luck to get typhoid fever in 1941, and the good luck to survive it. And then the damn thing got a hold of me a second time at Stalingrad in 1943. That meant that I had to get out from underneath the tank every 20 or 30 minutes to pass blood. When you've got typhoid fever, you stink to high heaven, and you're highly infectious. And we were lying close to each other. It was terrible.
In all this dreadful misery, there is no time for mercy.
Someone would come to me, point at a dead comrade and say, "Look, Lieutenant, look at those red spots on his skin." We'd apply pressure to the skin, and if any dents remained, we knew it was typhus. So what were we to do? 2 or 3 of us would quickly carry the man to the riverbank and throw him in. We had to do it like that before his body had the chance to infect the rest of us with the contagion.
I never thought horse meat could taste that good. Hunger hurts. Last year we laughed at the Red Army when they slaughtered and ate their horses. These days we don't leave the Russians anything.
For the first time since Napoleon's Russian campaign, German soldiers are starving to death.
As a medical officer, I had to draw up a report every 10 days about our losses, the men's state of health, etc., etc. It was submitted to the regimental doctor and the divisional doctor as well. Once, after I had reported that 2 men had died of starvation, I was immediately called in. My superior was furious with me. No soldiers ever died of starvation in the German army. I told him that he was sadly mistaken. Maybe it had never happened before in the German army, but now it was different.
By mid-December, more than 1,000 men are dying every day at Stalingrad. They are killed in the heat of battle and also by hunger and typhus. In most cases, their relatives are still informed personally of their deaths.
I had to notify the fallen soldiers' families. It was a very difficult task for me to accomplish, because I didn't know the soldiers who had fallen at Stalingrad, and I didn't know whether they'd even been buried or not. So I would write to the families. Regrettably, I have to inform you that your son has fallen in service of his Führer, his people, and his fatherland. I would then add that the only consolation I could offer was that he was killed by a shot in the head, or that he didn't suffer, or something like that.
The Russians are confident of victory. To persuade German soldiers to defect, the Soviet propaganda unit, supported by German communists, starts to target the Sixth Army.
Then it started, around the clock, non-stop, monotonous broadcasts. Stalingrad, mass grave. Stalingrad, mass grave. We heard that 24 hours a day.
The loudspeaker says, every 7 seconds a German soldier dies in Russia at Stalingrad mass grave. But this psychological terror does not have the desired effect.
We didn't believe it. We simply didn't believe it. It just wasn't the truth. It was like, well, how can I put it? For us, what that voice said just wasn't valid. It was the voice of the enemy. The voice of the enemy.
The men fear a Russian revenge as the propaganda continues. Special propaganda troops are detailed, but even they lack the necessary conviction.
The Soviet propaganda and the Russian call for the anti-fascist Germans to defect to the Red Army didn't achieve very much at all. Only a few men ended up coming over to our side. Just a few.
A German soldier writes to his wife.
I'll be honest with you, my love. Only a miracle can save us now. Don't let fate get you down. Go on being so brave for the sake of our 2 boys.
The only thing that kept us going through that awful time was the beautiful Madonna of Stalingrad. A few days before Christmas, a medical officer had found some pencils and made a drawing of her on the back of a Russian card.
Kurt Reuber, a doctor and theologian, draws the Madonna that gave hope to those who were doomed to die. He will die later in 1944 in Russian captivity.
That drawing and its message spread through our ranks like wildfire. It gave us new hope. Hope that things might still improve.
Light, life, love. That was the Madonna of Stalingrad's message. A message from another world. By the end of November 1942, Hitler returns to Wolschanze, his East Prussian headquarters. He still refuses to relent. He will not allow the Sixth Army to back out. The Romanian Marshal Antonescu is summoned to the Council of War. Members of the alliance are at odds with each other, and recriminations are flying about. Who is responsible for this catastrophe? In the end, they decide on a final battle of liberation. Field Marshal Manstein is to lead this operation.
What I found unfortunate about Manstein was that he never bothered to go to Stalingrad personally, which was a great pity. Of course it was dangerous, but he could have gone there and should have, as the commanding field marshal. I feel he should have taken a personal interest. Then he would have seen the terrible state of the soldiers who were caught in the Russians' trap, and how low the Sixth Army had sunk.
Manstein is to command a relief army, the Hoth Tank Division, to break the Kessel. They call it Operation Winter Storm.
At the time, the plains were freezing cold. At first everything was just frozen up, but then the snow also came. Thick snow began to fall. Eventually, everything was covered in snow, but we still had to report for duty.
The rescue mission has 3 divisions, only one of them newly equipped. They don't have enough fuel or air support. The army has no reserves left, but initially everyone is confident, especially since they have a new type of tank, the Tiger, which is considered to be superior to the Soviet T-34. The men from the tank division know what is expected of them.
We knew that some 300,000 men of the Sixth Army were waiting for us, They were relying on us utterly. They knew that we were on our way, and they were pinning all their hopes on us. We were to save them. We were their last resort.
At first, the Hof division makes good progress. The Red Army is taken by surprise. It has hardly any troops southwest of Stalingrad. But then things change. The German tank division is too weak. 60 kilometers before reaching Stalingrad, they come to a halt. 60 kilometers between survival and defeat. Not a great distance for a whole tank division. Liberation seems to be within their grasp.
The tanks in the front fired flares to show our trapped countrymen that we were on our way to rescue them.
Suddenly, hope stirs inside the Kessel.
We saw the flares, and we heard the artillery fire. You can hear very well at minus 40 degrees. In that crystal clear weather, you can hear everything.
The breakout seems imminent. The excited Germans burn most of their possessions, determined not to leave anything to the enemy. But this soon proves to have been an over-hasty decision.
Everything was burning. There were flames everywhere. And then came the command. We're staying. Many troops even burnt their thick coats. We'd been issued with winter coats that were lined and rather long. The men grabbed their coats and threw them into the fire because they said they'd be able to run much faster with only their uniforms on. There was no doubt in their minds that they were finally going to get out of the Kessel at last.
But within the ranks of the General Staff, the situation is more realistically assessed.
By around the 19th of December, we were told that the breakout wasn't going to happen, and that we had to return to our old dugouts. And then it was clear, at least it was completely clear to me, that the end was near. It was simply a question of when it would finally come.
But on the front, the illusion lasts longer.
At night, we could hear the battle sounds from where we were in the Kessel. In those wide open spaces and with that kind of cold, you can hear very clearly. After Christmas, the sounds moved further and further away. And then we no longer heard anything. That's when we knew, even though we weren't officially informed, that we wouldn't be able to break out of Stalingrad.
It is now the 23rd of December, and Manstein is forced to pull back his tank division. Further north, a new Soviet attack has been launched. Germany's entire eastern front is in danger, and Manstein is not the only one to understand what this means.
Of course, it was obvious that the occupying troops at Stalingrad were left in the lurch. They were sacrificed. A senseless sacrifice.
The divisions that are supposed to be the saviors suffer heavy losses. Their mission ends in disaster, and they are plagued by feelings of guilt.
We felt like traitors. Our aim had been to get them out of there, but we failed. We simply couldn't do it. Many, many years have passed since that time. But to this day, I don't celebrate on Christmas Eve. I simply cannot do it.
At home, a brave face is put on. The weekly newsreel soothes the nation.
Protected by a strong front, our homeland can prepare for its fourth Christmas while at war.
But most Germans lack the festive spirit. Despite an official news embargo on Stalingrad, Defense Force informers report grave concern among citizens. By the Volga, the atmosphere is one of despair. There is no peace to celebrate.
The mood was bleak. Everyone was depressed. We just sat there and sang a few Christmas carols. Many of our comrades cried as they looked at pictures of their families.
On Christmas Eve 1942, the Third Reich's official radio station plays Silent Night for all the armed forces. Then the station crosses over live to the various units that are far away from their homes and loved ones. First, the Navy vessels in the English Channel are hailed. Then the submarine crews in the Atlantic. Then the men fighting in the snow high up in the mountains. And finally, the almost forgotten troops at Stalingrad, where Christmas 1942 is spent in limbo between life and death.
It was a very clear night. The moon was incredibly clear. It was eerie. And the Russians left us alone. There were only occasional shots on Christmas Eve. For me, that Christmas was heavenly. I felt there was a bridge that stretched over the entire earth. A starry night and the moon, the same moon that my family could see in Germany. Most of us knew the end was near, and we wrote farewell letters, hoping that they would be delivered to our people. All we thought of was home.
Back home, 300,000 families fear for their loved ones, fathers, sons, husbands, sweethearts, brothers. While German propaganda paints a scene of Christmas trees and bright lights, the 6th Army at Stalingrad reports that 60 men have died of starvation. At the Volga, the Empire's official Christmas greetings are no longer welcome.
The Führer's Christmas gift was supposed to be a parcel containing gingerbread or something, and cigarettes, and I don't know what else. With a postcard saying, "Greetings from the Führer," or something ridiculous like that. But by the time it reached us in our shelters, all that remained were 3 cigarettes and a few sweets.
On Christmas Day, the following entry is made in the 6th Army's War Diary.
For the past 48 hours, we have received no supplies. We are running out of food and fuel. Our men are fast losing their strength.
A general writes to his wife.
Of course, Christmas was no fun. In times like these, one shouldn't celebrate. You can't expect people to be happy under these circumstances.
The general is Friedrich Paulus. While in charge at Stalingrad, he will be promoted to the rank of Field Marshal.
At Christmas, we ate horse meat. We dug up some horses from under the snow. We all knew where the dead horses were. We cut off chunks of flesh and made ourselves meatballs. Horse meatballs. That was our Christmas meal.
At Christmas time, many German soldiers fall prey to Soviet shock troops.
We liked their Christmas. It was a perfect time to go looting. We always came back with lots of gifts. Sausage, jam, small Christmas trees. We took whatever we could get, and we never felt bad about it. After all, the Germans had the words "God with us" engraved on their belt buckles. They were religious people.
The Festival of Love. Here it has long since turned into blind hatred. Both sides show no mercy to the enemy. For many, Christmas becomes a turning point.
Christmas was the final straw, the turning point. After Christmas, people no longer said, "The Fuhrer will get us out of here." The men just kept quiet, or they moaned and cursed. But that was always dangerous. In the army, disrespect could get you a death sentence, especially during war, and especially in a place like Stalingrad.
There are still some civilians left inside the castle, more than 10,000 of them. The Soviets did not evacuate them, and the Germans don't take any care of them. These people are robbed of their bare essentials.
Once the castle was closed, I had the unfortunate task of going to the Russian civilians and commandeering their wooden houses. We continued doing that to the very end. Every time my men and I set out in our lorries, we could no longer use tanks, to go and commandeer 2 horses for our forces. We took along some extra bits and pieces we had, especially things for the children. The only people left in the area were children and old people. I always took them something, even if it was only a piece of chocolate, to show them that we weren't as evil as they quite rightfully thought we were. We had no choice but to take their houses. It was for our own survival.
The freezing hell of Stalingrad will claim more than 700,000 lives. Germans, Russians, soldiers, civilians. Every death is a tragedy. And still there are officers who give their soldiers orders to perform heinous crimes.
An officer ordered me to shoot a young Russian soldier. I refused and told him to do it himself. But he was too much of a coward to shoot the young man. He wanted me to do his dirty work. I didn't budge. I wasn't prepared to do it. The officer saw he was losing face. He turned around and marched off. I called the Russian and said he was free to go. He was so grateful that he knelt at my tank and prayed. The Russian realized that he had to get away fast, and he scurried away, hopping like a rabbit. But he had no chance of escaping. The officer saw him and simply ordered someone else to shoot him. An infantryman raised his machine gun and fired. The Russian made a few somersaults and then ended up on the ground, dead.
That is the fate of many prisoners. Too often their lives end like that. But everyone has a different experience.
The first Germans who came to our house were fine, but later on they treated us badly. The first time 3 Germans came to our house, I was only 6 years old. I went to hide under the bed. The captain had a chocolate in his hand. I still remember that very clearly. The chocolate was filled with rum. He gave it to me. I don't know where he got it from. When the youngest soldier, his name was Walter, lay down on the bed to have a rest, I was allowed to play with his rifle.
But early in the new year, the Yurazov family also lands in dire straits.
The inhabitants were ordered to collect all their warm things and give them to the Germans. Blankets, hot water, bottles, food. They took everything. They left us nothing. All that remained was a bit of food.
Still, there are islands of humanity in the middle of an inferno.
The captain often showed us his pictures. There was a picture of his wife and children. He showed them to my mother and me. We were surprised to see that the Germans also had factories like ours. Walter never showed us any pictures.
New Year's Day 1943, and the Germans are waiting for the end. But the propaganda machine continues to spout lies. Joseph Goebbels' New Year speech is full of patriotic rhetoric.
Deep in enemy territory, our soldiers are keeping watch. Not even the infernal fury and stubborn determination of the wild brutes of the East will shake them. If until now anyone has doubted that we can and will ultimately be victorious, our nation has come up with the most persuasive proof. A nation that can survive trials and tribulations like these is surely destined for a great future.
For the men at Stalingrad, this is sheer scorn.
We were glorified, even though we were still alive. We weren't all dead yet, by no means. There were still hundreds, in fact thousands of us. And that was an incredible insult to us.
To the west of Stalingrad, the Red Army is advancing relentlessly. Tatsinskaya, the most important airfield for the German airlift of supplies into the Kessel, is attacked. More than 70 transport aircraft are lost on the ground. Göring's promise to keep sending supplies by air dissolves into utter despair.
In the later stages, things became completely chaotic. While an aeroplane was taking off, men would be running after it on the runway, trying desperately to escape from the Kessel.
50,000 wounded soldiers are evacuated by air, but tens of thousands are left behind. The planes have no room for all of them.
Terrible scenes took place at the airfields. Ordinary soldiers were no longer allowed near the aeroplanes, but some pushed their way through, and when there was no space inside, they hung onto the planes, to the wheels or the wings. When the aeroplane took off, they were taken along, but by the time it reached 300 or 400 meters, they fell because they were frozen stiff and couldn't hold on any longer.
Stalingrad's airfields are the gateway to survival, but the way there is a road of death.
There were bomb craters everywhere, and they were full of dead soldiers covered with snow. I ran around for a while, and then I found a bunker 300 meters from there. Inside the bunker, there were a couple of medics. I asked them to let me in, but they wouldn't, until I told them I still had a hand grenade left. Then they opened the bunker and let me in. There were a lot of wounded men inside. One of them was from Essen, and he said he wasn't going to go back to the airfield again. He'd spent the entire night outside, freezing and waiting to be airlifted back to Germany. But it was to no avail. There were too many injured soldiers, and the planes took off again seconds after landing. But I wasn't going to be put off by his story.
Hans Rostovitz eventually makes it to the airfield at Gumrak.
Suddenly, an airplane landed and roared towards us. It stopped 10 meters ahead of me. The door opened, a couple of crates and a few bags were thrown out. By then, we were at the door. I was still trying to explain that I had a head injury, but the man just shouted, "Get in! Get in!" 17 of us scrambled in. The door was slammed shut, the engine started, and the plane was ready to leave again. I noticed that the runway was quite bumpy, but before I could get worried, we had already taken off.
Those who are not wounded have no chance of being airlifted, and for thousands there remains only one way out of the Kessel.
Stick with me, I said, and I'll see if I can find a place where we can sneak through. But he just shook his head and said, "Thanks for everything you've done. You spent so much time trying to help me, trying to talk me out of it, but I can't stand this any longer." Then I knew. When he raised his pistol and shook my hand without saying a word, then I knew this was the end for him.
In some German units, there are even cases of cannibalism. Desperation triumphs over humanity.
I witnessed with my own eyes how German soldiers butchered a well-fed paymaster shortly after he died. They ripped out his lungs and liver. By then, things had become so bad, and ordinary, normal people were so desperate that they simply lost their minds.
The Red Army keeps pulling the noose of steel tighter and tighter round the Germans. This is no longer a battle, merely an execution. Death becomes anonymous, and there are no more letters of condolence to the fatherland and no graves.
In a way, we felt sorry for them. Because at the time, we were well dressed. We had fur jackets and felt shoes. We were well fed. On a number of occasions, I saw our soldiers giving the Germans some bread.
It is now the 8th of January, and the Soviet negotiators call for Paulus to surrender. But he has strict orders from Hitler to fight to the last bullet. The reason? The Führer believes that the Sixth Army is still capable of keeping the Soviet forces occupied and therefore of holding the Eastern Front.
Why was Zhukov and the Red Army's offer to surrender turned down on the 8th of January? Why were the peace negotiators chased away with shots? In the end, only 6,000 of us came back alive from Stalingrad. But it could have been many more, at least 10 times more, if not 20.
Early in January, a soldier writes home.
Dear Mother, don't worry about me. The Kessel is wide. There are at least 200,000 men in here, and we're doing everything we can to straighten things out again.
It was delusion and blindness that led the Germans into this catastrophe, and now the senseless deaths will continue. The worst is yet to come.